Hi everyone, this week's Parsha is Parshat Vayeshev. And in this week's Parsha, it's finally time for the Jews to start moving down to Mitzrayim, to Egypt. And this all starts, the ball gets rolling when the sons of Yaakov, the brothers of Joseph, sell Joseph down to Mitzrayim, down to Egypt. And this begs an obvious question. How do the righteous sons of Yaakov, whom the 12 tribes are named after, such righteous people, sell their brother down to Egypt? So we could see a possible answer in the first verse, the first pasuk of this week's parsha, when it says Vayeshev Yaakov be'eretz migurei aviv be'eretz Canaan, and Jacob dwelt in the land of his fathers, Eretz Canaan. This verse comes in contrast to the verse that at the end of last week's parsha that talks about Esav, that Esav, Yaakov's arch nemesis and brother, dwelled in the land of Har Seir. Rashi explains that Yaakov, at this point of his life, he was basically ready to retire. What does this mean? We see in the Haftorah from last week that Yosef was almost, is the remedy to defeating Esav, as it's alluded to in the Haftorah, that Beit Yosef, the house of Joseph, is like the flame that it will ignite the straw that represents Esav. So in Yaakov's mind, his work was done. He had Yosef, he was raising his kids, and eventually we'll see that Joseph prevails, or the idea of the house of Joseph prevails over Esav historically. But then how does that lead to his other sons selling Joseph down to Egypt, right? There's some disconnect here. And we see that in Yaakov's retiring, thinking that he's done with his mission, he stopped educating his other children, right? He didn't leave them in check. He thought everything was going to be good. And that, in case, was the fatal flaw that led to the Jews to be moved down to Egypt in this week's Parsha. So Rabbi Moshe Feinstein has a great piece about this, about how education for Jews should never stop. We learn from Yaakov in this week's Parsha that educators should never stop educating, regardless of whether they think their journey is done or not. The answer is it's not. We see that in the Talmud, there's endless things we could learn from countless amounts of educators. So that's number one. And number two, as people we all receive education as well, we should always be in active pursuit of education, because when we're not in active pursuit of education and when educators aren't actively educating, we find ourselves in sticky situations where we might come to sell our siblings down to Egypt, as we see in this week's Parsha. So my bracha to everyone this week is that we could really learn from this valuable lesson that we should, as Jews, we should always be in an active pursuit of learning. And once Rabbi Noach Weinberg, Zichrono Livracha, has a very famous line saying that if you know Aleph, teach Aleph, meaning if you know something, teach it, share it with everyone else. And as Hanukkah is approaching, we have the same idea that, you could light other people's light with your light, a very famous idea, which we'll probably speak about next week. But with that, I wish everyone a good week and Shabbat Shalom.